If you're starting a family law case, you want to make sure that you have the right paperwork. So for starters, you would usually need a Form 8 family court application. You would need a financial statement if you're asking for support and or if you're asking for property as well. So there's two different financial statements. There's one that's for support only, and there's another, the Form 13.1 that you use if there are property claims involved. And of course, if there are children, then there's the Form 35.1 where you deal with decision-making responsibilities and questions related to that. So you want to make sure that you complete the paperwork properly so that your matter can move smoothly. First, you want to avoid your process not even getting started in a timely manner because the paperwork, if it's not done properly, could get returned to you. Or in worst case scenario, you don't want to find yourself all the way at the trial and find out that you didn't do something or there were claims that you should have made but didn't, and now you're not able to you know, get an order that you want the court to make for you. So here are some common mistakes that people make on their family court application. First, missing or incomplete information. Please go through the forms properly. I know sometimes it's a lot. It looks very busy. There's a lot of things to fill out and whatnot, but make sure that you complete the information as thoroughly as possible, okay? When you're making claims, make sure that you include information to support your claim, relevant information. So what I mean by that is if you're asking the court for support as an example, make sure you're including, some information as to why you are entitled to support. Is it because you have a need because the other person was the primary breadwinner, or could it be because you think you ought to be compensated because of sacrifices that you made as a result of the relationship? So make sure you're clear about that. If you're also looking for something like parenting as an example, make sure whatever you're asking, so say in an example where you're asking for, sole decision-making responsibilities, well, you want to make sure you put in some information as to why that's in the best interest of the child. So having said that, make sure you try as much as possible to stay away from the irrelevant and which are usually emotional stuff. So when I say put in information that supports your claim, you have to draw a line somewhere. You don't want to put in too much information. Usually when you're verging on the irrelevant, just put enough for the court to kind of understand why you're asking that. But don't go into too many details, trying to badmouth the other person, information about, very negative character traits. Now, if a negative character trait is related to why you should say have primary decision making as an example, then that's fine, but just keep it as short and sweet as possible. Don't get overly emotional with it. If not, you might lose the judge. And make sure that whatever you're asking the court, the orders you're asking for is clear. So in the application, for the most part, things like divorce, boxes like equalization of property, support, those are usually check boxes. You can easily check, and that's fine. But the times when you might be asking for other relief, like, occupation rent as an example. So that's fine. Make sure what you're asking is clear and what you're asking is something that's within, the family court, jurisdiction to give to you. So try to, and if you're able to kind of narrow what you're asking the courts as well. So if you can be specific, if you know the other party's income, then it would be great. You could specify maybe what you're asking for in terms of child support, spousal support. But if you don't have that, that's fine. You can just still leave it clear. But just the idea is for you to try to frame your claims in a way that any judge that picks up your matter can understand the claims you want and make sure, and then has an idea of why you're asking it, and it makes sense to them because you've given facts to back up the claims that you're making. Be careful with financial disclosure. Make sure that, and now I'm talking about the Form 13 or Form 13.1, if there are support claims or property claims. Make sure that you attach the relevant documentation. Usually you will need 3 years of your income tax return, and you would also need a recent pay stub. So make sure that you have that kind of information. The financial statement, especially the property claims involved, and if you had some assets before marriage, if there are gifts that you received during the marriage, things like that, be very careful And make sure in that case, I would really, really strongly suggest that you have a lawyer look over your materials because you don't want to shortchange yourself. So make sure you do that. Remember, with family court, disclosure, 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 it's very important. You don't want your case or you don't want your case to be struck out just because you're ignoring disclosure orders. And even worse, well, no, that's worse, but in some cases, if you don't provide the disclosure, it doesn't mean that an order would not be made, okay? It just means that it might be made on incorrect information. And here's what I mean. Support is an issue and you're earning $100,000, but you fail to provide disclosure. So there's nothing supporting the $100,000 that you're making. Well, if the other side can ask that income be imputed to you to the tune of an amount higher than what you're actually making. So do be careful there and make sure that you provide the required information. If there are any, okay, we talked about the best interest of the children, and I just want to make sure that whatever I want to stress on that because that's something that if children are involved, the courts will be particular about the best interest of the child and making sure that that is protected. So just look at things from that lens. I understand happy parent, happy child, but make sure that you're framing things from, the views of what is best for the child. Also think about how you're framing your claims. So I've talked about making these different claims, making sure that you're clear in your claims, including, statements of fact that support the claims you're making. Well, also, you want to check that application to make sure that you're not making contradictory statements. Someone on the one part might say, I'm trying to come up with an example on the fly of, things that might contradict. So if you're, for example, saying, well, the other person isn't feeling well, they're mentally ill, and so they're not able to take care of the children, and then on the same token, you're saying, well, they're underemployed and they could be making more, they can do much more and they could earn more. Well, you might want to be, without further clarification, there could be some inconsistency here because if a person is actually not doing well mentally, it could have a direct correlation with their ability to be a top earner within whatever field they're in. So there might be an explanation, there might be a way it ties in, but I'm just using that as an example for you to think about sort of the claims that you're making and make sure that, by taking facts to support one claim, you're not making statements that are inconsistent with respect to the other claims that you're making. So the last two pieces of advice that I want to give to make sure that you are setting yourself up for success when you go to family court is seek independent legal advice. So even if you don't want to have a lawyer represent you every step of the way, get independent, draft your materials, and at least have a lawyer look over it, right? At the very least. It may not be perfect, it may not be done in the manner and style that a lawyer would do it, but at least they'll be able to take a look and ensure that you've covered things high level, or even talk to a lawyer before you get started. I'm a fan of being proactive. So talk to a lawyer before you get started so that they can set you up properly for success. Based on the claims that you're trying to make, based on your story, they can kind of guide you through how to frame your claims to the court. If there are things that they think you should leave out, things that are irrelevant, or things that you didn't even think, but you ought to think of, or you ought to be claiming, they'll be able to guide you to do that. So seek independent legal advice as soon as possible. And lastly, do not overlook alternative dispute resolution, okay? Do not overlook independent legal advice. You need to do that, but do not if possible, as much as possible, make sure you have exhausted all of your options with respect to alternate ways to resolve your disputes. And I'm talking about, collaborative family law, negotiations between, counsel if possible, mediation, there's other ways. In fact, the family court application actually has the applicant certify that they've considered other out-of-court options. So that's a reflection on the courts even wanting applicants to have looked into out-of-court options to settle their case before actually bringing a family court application. So that's just a few and common mistakes that I've noticed that people make on family court applications. Of course, they're different. This is not an exhaustive list, but I hope that this would help guide you while you're drafting your family court application. Good luck, and until next time, it's bye for now.